Hello and welcome. If you are new here, I currently talk and write about intentional living, but within that, I love to talk about topics such as faith, family, health, travel, reading, and just some random assortment of topics as well. But health is a topic that I am really passionate about. And within that is the whole vaccine discussion. So, vaccines is a topic that I have talked about since my children were quite little. And I would have thought that at this point, when I now have two grown children and one that's a junior in high school, we're past the vaccine decisions, I would have thought that my passion would have died down, but it's done the exact opposite because I care so greatly about this topic and what vaccines can do to a generation of children and what it's already doing. And we see the impacts and we see the effects of that in our world if we're paying attention. And I think a lot of parents haven't connected the dots. And there's a lot of parents who have, and there's more and more people who are joining this conversation. It is a controversial topic, but I usually do not shy away from controversial topics. I do feel like it's necessary for us to discuss them, and we should be able to discuss them. So, sharing a little bit about this book that I just started. So, I'm not coming on here today to tell you what I think about this book. I just thought I'll share a little bit as I go. And if you're interested more, I can share more. And if we don't have enough people interested, that's fine too. So, the title of the book is called Vaccines, Amen. The Religion of Vaccines, and the author is Siri. So, I thought I would just kind of share with you a little bit from the introduction and a little bit from part one, kind of like a Cliff Notes version. For many of us, we're never going to sit down and read a book like this, especially we're just busy. I do because I love learning. I love health. I love this topic of vaccines. So I will be the nerd who will sit down and read this cover to cover, but I realize that others won't, and that's totally okay. So I thought I'd share with those of you who are interested. So the book starts out with the introduction telling really who he is. I had never heard of Siri before. And he starts out in the introduction saying this: ever hear someone say, I believe in cars or I believe in tools? I cannot recall ever hearing anyone say they believe in a certain product. But I hear people say, I believe in vaccines all the time, especially in response to evidence regarding vaccines. The expression, I believe in vaccines, carries a truism. The properties often attributed to vaccines require faith, belief. This is because most claims about vaccines are not grounded in evidence. They are beliefs. It is why challenging claims about vaccines, meaning challenging beliefs, often results in an emotional, not logical reaction. This is also why wading into this topic is not for the faint of heart, nor is it for anyone seeking to avoid controversy. Just the word vaccines evokes emotions for many. So that's how he starts out. And I love a good introduction. That usually tells me, do I really want to read this, or am I going to like the writing style of this author? And I can say before I share any more, just in as far as I'm into the very first chapter, I really like his writing style. He is an attorney, and he takes this subject that is incredibly complex, and he makes it readable for the average person. And I really appreciate that. I love his style of writing. I love even the conversational way that he writes, and he doesn't try to write it to prove how brilliant he is, which usually makes the rest of us feel quite stupid. Okay, so continuing on in the introduction, the next section is titled Falling into Vaccine Law. So he shares how he is an attorney, and he basically began managing a law firm with over 100 professionals working on vaccine injury, and this is something he never anticipated stepping into. at all. But he said, one fateful day, I learned something I could not unlearn. Of all the corporations I was defending, I would likely never have to defend a pharmaceutical company against claims that children were seriously injured or killed by a vaccine. Why? Because in 1986, Congress granted these companies financial immunity for injuries caused by childhood vaccines in a law titled the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, the 1986 Act. Did you know about that? If you have paid attention to vaccines for a while, if you're passionate about it, you absolutely know about this act, but a lot of people don't. So is it surprising to you to learn that if you have a child who is injured by a vaccine, you cannot sue the vaccine manufacturer? Isn't that crazy? Is there any other industry in the entire world that this is true for? No, there's not. But there is for vaccines. Wonder why? All right, skipping down. Parents who do not vaccinate. This is still in his introduction, so he's still just setting the stage. And he wants to talk about the parents who do not vaccinate, then what he calls the vaccine zealots, and then he talks about his bias. So parents who do not vaccine, he says, according to the CDC and public health authorities, parents who choose not to vaccinate their children are typically highly educated. CDC data reflect that half of American children are not fully vaccinated, and at least 1 in 88 toddlers in America are completely unvaccinated. Why would the parents of these children, constituting a large part of the nation's brain trust, choose not to vaccinate their children? After all, parents who choose not to vaccinate are, as the CD laments, typically very highly educated. They're often scientifically literate. Many are medical professionals, leading scientists. What is it that they have learned or experienced that convince them to forego what many believe is the greatest medical achievement of all time? The answer I have found is that they have often had an experience which caused them to scratch below the surface of common conclusory statements about vaccines. They seek the substance that underpins these statements. What they learn, they cannot unlearn, cannot unsee. And this really resonates with me. And when I first started researching and learning about the effects of vaccines on our children, the one thought I kept coming back to is, I know why the pharmaceutical industry defends their position. They make billions upon billions of dollars. So it's a no-brainer. They make money. That's what they do. But for the anti-vaxxers, as we've been labeled, what do we have to profit? What do we have to benefit? Because a lot of times we are ostracized, made fun of, excluded, called crazy names. What do we have to gain? Nothing. So it's usually an experience. A parent has an experience that alters the course of their life and the life of their child or their children. And it creates in them a desire to speak out and help other parents. So in the two camps, one profits billions of dollars. The other is made fun of and excluded. So it kind of got my attention, like why these parents have nothing to gain. If anything, they have things to lose, but they're doing it out of the part of their hearts that desires to help other families, to save them from maybe some of the heartache that they have gone through with their children or their loss of a child. So skipping down, he talks about vaccine zealots. There's something, he says this in the book, there is something else I found surprising in my journey regarding vaccines. The popular conception is that those who do not vaccinate are fanatics, anti-science, irrational, emotional zealots. But my experience has generally been the opposite. To be sure, there are some who take issue with vaccines who met the foregoing description. They are also the ones who can often be the loudest. But they are, in my experience, the very tiny but vocal tip of the iceberg. The remainder submerge silently and quietly under the water, not wanting any publicity of any kind, and who do not dare speak their views in mixed company, make up the vast majority of those who choose not to vaccinate. These folks, as a group, are highly knowledgeable and educated about these products. They can speak rationally about them. They are typically science literate and put that ability to good use in researching these products. They are far from zealots. They are just parents seeking to make good decisions for their children. As for parents who do vaccinate, almost all such parents I have met appear to have never really thought much about these products, nor have they viewed this as a decision to be made. They just go with the flow. They've never encountered any issue with their children that they have associated with vaccination. They often do what the media typically tells good parents to do: trust their doctors. That is not to say they do not hold orthodox views about vaccines, but those views are susceptible to change upon presentation of actual evidence. Then there's what I call the vaccines amen crowd, hence the name of the book. This is the group of parents, doctors, and public health officials I have dealt with, a small army of them, who have fervent belief in vaccines. This group is often impervious to reason or data, even when it's provided from their oracle, the CDC. This group attributes properties to one or more vaccines that simply do not exist. They overstate the benefits and cannot accept even official government data showing that many of their core beliefs regarding vaccines are false. And when these beliefs are challenged, the crowd gets angry. Let me put it this way. The fanatics are not those who choose not to vaccinate. The fanatics are those who think everyone must be vaccinated, whether or not they want to engage in this medical procedure. So then he goes on to talk about his bias and he says, my personal ideological position regarding vaccines is that vaccines should not be mandated. Everyone should be able to get a vaccine, any vaccine, and get as many as they want. But civil and individual rights demand that no one should be coerced into receiving an unwanted medical product or procedure, including a vaccine. And that was my position as well during the 2020 era as well. That idea of forcing a vaccine. People had to take vaccines in order to save their jobs. That should have never happened. And we better be careful because you know that they're going to try it again as well. That was just a test run. That's just my 2 cents. So be careful and be on the watch. He says, in fact, my rule of thumb is that the more a product needs to be coerced, the more one should be concerned about that product. When they began giving that shot away for free and giving all these incentives to take it, we should have been very, very wary of why that was the case. Okay, so now he moves into part 1. Now, I think this is so interesting how he sets up this book. So in the table of contents, he breaks down, he has a part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. Now, of course, remember, we go back to the name is Vaccines, Amen, the religion of vaccines. And he breaks it down. Part 1 is the clergy. Part 2 is the church. Part 3 is the faith. And part 4 is the golden calf. And I love how he uses these analogies to really make it make sense to us. And so chapter 1 starts out with the high priest, Stanley Plotkin. So I'm just going to read you some of the things that I highlighted. And I hope you find this interesting. And feel free to bow out at any time. If vaccines, it's not on your radar, that is okay. Come back. I talk about all kinds of different things and write about all kinds of different things. But for those of you who are interested in this, stick around for a few more minutes. Okay, so he talks about this Stanley Plotkin, he'll go on to introduce here in a second. He said, the reality is that most doctors, including pediatricians, immunologists, however you say that word, and infectious disease doctors know almost nothing about vaccines. Do you find that surprising? And do you believe that? Have you ever tried to talk to your doctor about vaccines? I have, several of our doctors, and it's an interesting conversation. I have tried to talk to doctors when my children were little, and they got angry, and their anger really caught me off guard. Their defensiveness, their inability to explain anything, and instead they totally reverted to these logical fallacies and absolutely tried to turn it on me and shame me or make me feel stupid for questioning it. Even when I would ask them about things that were written on the inserts of the vaccines, they did not want to answer those questions. And what I found is most of the time they couldn't. They did not know what the ingredients were. They did not know the long-term effects. That's because it's never been studied. They didn't know. They didn't have an answer for it. And a lot of them get paid so that you take those vaccines. So they want you to take the vaccines. Now, obviously, this is not all doctors. We have some great doctors. We have some who are very open to discussing, and we have some who want you to make your own decisions. But if you've been in it for a minute, you know what you can encounter there. And he talks about that. He says they rely on the word of vaccinologists, either directly or by following vaccine-related science, policy, and standards molded by vaccinologists. So the godfather of vaccinology, one vaccinologist sits far above all others, someone whose claims regarding vaccines are treated as fact-based and nothing more than utterance from his lips. The world's leading vaccinologist, often referred to as the godfather of vaccinology, is Dr. Stanley Plotkin. So the author of this book, remember he's an attorney, he had the opportunity to do a deposition on Dr. Plotkin. Dr. Plotkin had been called in as an expert witness in a case where it was a family law case where the mother wanted to keep her daughter unvaccinated and the father wanted to start vaccinating the child. So it went to family law, and they called Dr. Plotkin as an expert witness. And the author of this book, Siri, had the opportunity to depose Dr. Plotkin. He tells us a little bit about who he is. It says, Stanley Plotkin, the literal namesake of the medical textbook on vaccines, titled Plotkin's Vaccines. And the gavel used at CDC's vaccine committee meetings is the Plotkin gavel. The man who invented many of the current vaccines, published more studies on vaccines than anyone, and is far and away considered the world's leading authority on vaccines. And then he goes on to say, during his 9-hour exchange with Dr. Plotkin, he left astonished that the worst fears expressed regarding safety gaps related to childhood vaccines were not only true, they were worse than I could have imagined. This is no doubt why the other side in that family law case made an impassioned motion to the court after the deposition to have the deposition sealed from the world forever, which we succeeded in opposing. So then he talks more about Dr. Plotkin and the importance of how Dr. Plotkin thinks about vaccine safety. So he said he's listed as an author on over 900 peer-reviewed articles, reviews, abstracts, and letters in medical journals between 1958 and 1925. Most regarding vaccines. It says, let's see, he's been an editor for every major vaccine-related journal, including Vaccine. He created the standard medical textbook on vaccines called Plotkin's Vaccines, currently in its 8th edition, and he's listed as an editor on the front page of each edition. often referred to, this textbook is often referred to, including by Bill Gates, as the Bible for vaccinologists. In reaction, Dr. Plotkin has quipped, "I hope it's more accurate than the Bible." For sure not. The Bible is infallible. It is 1,000,000% accurate in every regard, and there's not a single lie in the Bible. So right away, you can see the person who is at the forefront of the vaccine conversation and this leading scientist and expert who is leading the vaccine conversation. He developed and worked on the development of numerous vaccines, including the rubella vaccine, polio, chickenpox, and rotavirus, just to name a few. He is basically treated as a demigod by the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP. Okay, now here is the part that I wonder what you think about this. I think this is incredibly eye-opening. So he begins the deposition, and he says he dives right in. This is in 2018 when this took place. And he said, okay, the next 2 hours of the deposition were spent going through Dr. Plotkin's long line of incestuous conflicts with the pharma companies that profit from vaccines, including Merck, Pfizer, Sanofi, and GlaxoSmithKline. These are the same 4 companies that sell and profit from nearly every vaccine on the CDC's childhood schedule. Dr. Plotkin consulted for these companies for decades, sat on their corporate boards, and received an undisclosed portion of more than $182 million in royalties from sales of rubella, rotavirus, and rabies vaccines by one or more of these companies. Do you see a conflict of interest at all there? He profited $182 million. Do you think he's going to say that they're unsafe when he has all of that money at stake? Of course not. It's ludicrous to think so. He's not an impartial person in this conversation. And that should bother us greatly. The author goes on to say, what's deeply troubling is not that he earned millions of dollars working for and promoting the interests of these pharma companies while sitting on their boards, acting as a consultant or advisor for them, advocating on their behalf in government meetings, and more. No crime in that. What is deeply troubling is that while working at the behest of pharma, Dr. Plotkin ruled the established science of vaccinology for decades as if he were an impartial scientist. That's the problem. He's not impartial. Dr. Plotkin is viewed as an impartial scientist, and his views on vaccines are accepted as the established science of vaccinology relied upon by the scientific community, typically without question, and in turn by regulators to set public policy regulations and mandates concerning these products. He is so blind. So I'm skipping a lot, and I'm just kind of sharing some highlights and nuggets. He's so blind to this that he couldn't understand why the millions and millions of dollars he received from pharma could possibly influence his views on vaccines, as is evident from his deposition. And then he goes on to show every single question and answer from that deposition to prove his point. And it's kind of off-putting, quite honestly, to read this deposition. And I'll just read you a few. He says, the attorney asked the question, is there a year since 1990 that you've not received any kind of payment from Sanofi? And he answers, probably not, no. How much did you receive? Oh my God, I have no idea. I'm sure it's a sizable amount of money. Do you anticipate receiving any payments from Merck in the future? Sure. GSK? Yes. Pfizer? Very likely. And do you continue to receive any payments from the sale of the rubella vaccine? Currently, I don't think so. When did it cease? Oh, Jesus, I couldn't tell you exactly. Like, that's kind of his attitude as he's answering these questions, which is odd. So the author, at the end of showing some of these question and answers, says this response is incredible. Imagine if he was an expert testifying about the safety of a Boeing airplane. Nobody would question whether asking about how much money he received from Boeing was relevant as to whether he may have a bias in favor of Boeing. That is true of any expert testifying about the safety of any product. Money the expert witness receives from the company profiting from the product would obviously be considered relevant as to whether the expert may have a bias. But when it comes to vaccines, the reverence for and beliefs held about these products by some are blinding. Certainly they are to Dr. Plotkin, who cannot see why receiving money, millions, and for decades no less, from the pharma companies that profit from them could bias his views about these products. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Okay. Skipping over to a section in this chapter, the importance of clinical trials. He said the exchange with Dr. Plotkin about vaccine safety began with establishing the importance of the clinical trials. I think this part will blow your mind too. Relied upon to license each childhood vaccine. Okay, so repeating that. He's talking about the vaccine safety, establishing the importance of the clinical trials that are relied upon in order to license the childhood vaccine. Those trials are conducted by the pharma company seeking to license the vaccine. They are not conducted by the Food and Drug Administration. Did you know that? The pharma company then submits the data from the clinical trial to the FDA to obtain licensure. Who pays for these clinical trials? The pharma companies. They pay for the trials. They will get the results they want. It's so important to know when you're reading these clinical studies who funded them, because whoever funded them is going to get the outcome that they want. I think that that's very telling. Now, he has a section, avoid pre-licensure safety issues by conducting inadequate clinical trials. Do you believe that could happen? Do you believe that they could actually conduct inadequate clinical trials just so that they could license their product? Well, of course, absolutely. When there's billions of dollars at stake. He says, remember, the pharma companies seeking licensure of the vaccine and hoping to earn billions, if it is licensed, is funding these trials. Because these companies are not concerned about liability after licensure due to the 1986 Act, it makes financial sense for them to select and pay vaccinologists that will conduct the trial to avoid potential safety issues that could prevent licensure. Do you get that? How crazy is that? So it benefits the vaccine makers, the pharma companies, to pay the vaccinologists to weigh in on these studies and trials that they are funding so that it can get licensed. Because they know that once it's licensed, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a child dies, if a child develops autism, if a child develops some autoimmune disorder, it doesn't matter to the vaccine company. They do not care what happens to your child. And if you think they do, you're wrong. They don't. They care about the billions of dollars. And it's sad, but it is true. So they want to make sure that they get the license, because once it's out in the market, they can't be sued. If your child is injured, you're going to have to sue the federal government, and good luck collecting money on that. Unfortunately, parents have fought battles for many, many years and never collected a dime. Okay. So this is interesting. He has this exchange with Dr. Plotkin. And I'll back up a little bit. Back to the deposition, he writes, CDC's schedule provides for routine injections of Hep B vaccine at birth. The following exchange was about the first vaccine for Hep B of its kind ever to be licensed. You would expect that a new vaccine would be licensed based on a robust multi-year placebo-controlled trial, right? Wouldn't you? That's not asking too much. We're injecting something in a newborn baby. Many chronic diseases that plague children are not diagnosed until a few years of age. So if the trial is not reviewing safety for at least a few years, it can't possibly determine whether a new vaccine could be a contributing factor in causing these harms. He says, before you read the exchange Dr. Plotkin and I had about the clinical trial relied upon to license this Hep B vaccine, please ponder for a moment how long you would assume safety was monitored after injection in this clinical trial. And so just ask yourself that question, how long do you think that it would be studied? Curious as to what your guess would be. So he asked him in the deposition, and then he says, he's asking a series of questions. I'm just going to skip down the question the attorney asked. In section 6.1, when you look at the clinical trials that were done pre-licensure for this Hep B vaccine, how long does it say that safety was monitored after each dose? The answer by Dr. Plotkin, 5 days. 5 days. The next question, is 5 days long enough to detect adverse reactions that occur after 5 days? Do you know what Dr. Plotkin said? No. No. They would be reported separately as observed in the clinic. He asked another question, the attorney does. Okay, is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 5 days? The doctor answers, no. Question, is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days? Answer, no. Question, there's no control group, correct? Answer, no. Let's see. It does not mention any control group, no. The author goes on to say he was dumbfounded that Dr. Plotkin did not even know that according to the FDA documentation, this vaccine was licensed for infants based on a clinical trial that only monitored safety for 5 days after injection. He says, watching the video, it's plain Dr. Plotkin was surprised at the duration of safety monitoring. The fact that he seemed surprised while I had known about this alarming safety gap for years was shocking. This is literally the man whom the CDC and medical community look to as the world's leading authority on vaccines. The author writes, this was likely beyond the greatest fears of most vaccine skeptics. I don't think that almost anyone, absent seeing it with their own eyes, would believe that the FDA licensed a vaccine injected into newborns on the first day of life based on a clinical trial that only monitored safety for 5 days after injection in a trial with only 147 infants and children. Can you even believe that? Can you even believe that? He says it appears ludicrous and unbelievable, but there it is in the FDA documentation. And I'm going to stop there for now because that's about as far as I got last night in my reading. And of course, I was sucked right in. And a lot of this, what I'm sharing with you, is not new information to me, but I know that it is new information to a lot of people. Because for some of us, we are just quick to trust our doctors, trust the medical world. And I am not saying that every health professional, every doctor is evil and out to do us harm. That is not. There are amazing doctors, amazing health professionals. I'm so grateful for them. I'm also grateful for the advances in medicine and science. I am not okay with our current childhood vaccination schedule. I am not okay with mandating vaccines. I am not okay with the pharmaceutical company not being held liable for doing harm. That's not right. That's telling to us. Because if they felt confident in their products that they are injecting into children, they should have no problem standing behind those and putting themselves at risk for liability, just like every other product and industry in this entire world. Anything on the market, the company is subject to liability if it does harm, but not vaccines. That should make us scratch our heads at the least. Anyway, I think I'm going to enjoy the rest of this book. I like the way he is writing it. I like how readable it is. He will get into the super sciencey parts later on, I'm sure. But I feel like he is going to write in a way that makes it understandable. And I say any parent who has ever just slightly questioned, should I vaccinate my child, should read this book or start doing some research. And by research, I don't mean asking your doctor. I mean digging into the primary sources firsthand and seeing for yourself, and then looking at the ingredients, looking at the studies that were done, reading from parents who have had injured children and hearing their stories. That can be very eye-opening as well. Okay, so the name of this book again, Vaccines, Amen, The Religion of Vaccines by Siri, and I will link it in the post. And I don't know. I may share more as I go along. I may not. You can let me know if you're interested in more or not. And it's okay if you're not. All right. Have a great day.